the events that unfolded in the Middle East over the weekend, it's one of those significant events where you go, gosh, this is going to affect a whole bunch of things. And as the details have emerged, horrific details of what happened over the weekend as, Hamas terrorists attacked innocent people, the death toll continuing to mount, and of course Israel pushing back, and of course the innocent civilians going to get caught in the crossfire whatever happens. But what triggered these events? What are some of the factors at play, and how is this likely to unfold? Joining us on the program now, from the Democracy Project, geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Millar. Geoffrey, kia ora. Thank you so much for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew. You're very welcome.
In some ways, this was unexpected. This was out of the blue. People have said that this was Israel's 9/11. A bit of a failure, some would say, both for the Iron Dome security system and for Israeli security. What's your thoughts on this? Was it as unexpected as it appears?
Well, it's one of these things, Andrew, that was both, so shocking, but also very predictable in some ways. If you look at Gaza, it's been this open-air prison, a powder keg waiting to explode for years. And so many analysts and commentators have said that this strategy was not tenable by Israel of walling off Gaza. Now, that does not mean that Israel is to blame. And I think we need to be very careful to condemn these terrorist attacks. That's what they were, by a terrorist organization, and that's what Hamas is, on innocent civilians. And, it's just shocking when you read some of the news reports that are coming out about beheadings of toddlers and babies. It's just sickening. And, both Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu have likened Hamas to ISIS, and I think there is some basis for that. But I think there are many layers in this conflict, and I think that you can condemn those attacks by Hamas absolutely and categorically, while still contextualizing and critiquing and criticizing Israel's policies over many, many decades towards the Palestinians that have perhaps, in a way, helped to lay the ground for this explosion. And I do hope that there will be some good that comes out of all of this, because if anything, we've learned anything over the past few days, is that we need a long-term political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Israel is not well served by the current situation, neither are the Palestinians. So for everyone's benefit, we need a long-term solution. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu will be realizing right now, if he hasn't done so already, that the securitized solution to a political problem just didn't work. It's been tried since 2007. It did work in the short term. It stopped all those suicide bombings in Israeli cities and Israeli bars, cafes, restaurants that we had during the Second Intifada, the dark days back around 2001, 2002. You remember, just on a weekly basis here in New Zealand, we woke up to news of suicide bombings. But it didn't work in the long term, and that's it's become evident in the past few days.
Let's talk about the response to this, because as you say, absolute atrocities. The people of Israel are going to be scared. They're going to be angry. They're going to be demanding a response from the government. The concern is, I suppose, that the response may be disproportionate, even given the scale of the atrocities, that a full invasion of Gaza and basically shooting anything that moves, carpet bombing from the north to the south. People are saying that this is what we can expect. What's your view on it?
Yeah, there's a real risk that Israel will overreach here. Gaza is a tiny area. It's got 2.2 million people. It's around about 365 square kilometres, which doesn't mean anything to anyone, but I'll give you a comparison. Wellington City is just a little bit less than that.
Wow.
Not Greater Wellington, but just Wellington City. It's a very narrow strip of land, 41 kilometres long, no wider than 12 kilometres, and it's much narrower than that in some places. And so, you've got Hamas fighters who are contained within that population, and it's a very densely populated area. It's almost impossible to conduct, quote unquote, surgical airstrikes here. Many of those 1,100 Palestinians who are so far confirmed to have been killed will be civilians. and airstrikes are just almost impossible to conduct on Gaza without killing civilians. So ironically, a ground invasion would actually be a way perhaps to target it more at Hamas fighters.
Yeah.
I still think, though, we're in for a bloodbath here. Israel is just going to show no mercy. They will want absolute revenge and retaliation. And Benjamin Netanyahu just today has really promised to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And his defense minister have been saying similar things. And so they want to destroy Hamas. They're calling it absolutely like ISIS, and they want to absolutely destroy it, not just to degrade it, which has been the strategy in the past during past situations like this.
The hostages situation complicates things to an extent, and Hamas has been taking hostages for years. But the amount of hostages, the fact that that so many hostages were taken in a short period of time, including international hostages, this does make it more complicated. Again, an all-out assault when hostages are in the way of harm, this does make it more complicated for the Israeli army.
It absolutely does. And those hostages are bargaining chips for Hamas.
Yep.
Which is perhaps the only good thing in a way that's in the hostages' favor. They're worth a lot more alive than dead to Hamas. So they will be probably doing their best to protect the hostages, which may seem strange, but they don't get anything if they kill them. They can be traded at some point if they're alive. And, there are things that Hamas will want. They will want Palestinian prisoners freed from Israeli jails, 5,000 of them. They might want a ceasefire, and these hostages can be traded away one by one to get things that Hamas potentially wants down the track. But there are many, many foreign nationals amongst those hostages. Remember, a lot of Israelis are dual nationals with other countries. So there are, dual nationals with the United States particularly, but also France, Germany, Russia, all kinds of countries really have got a stake here because their nationals are being held captive by Hamas as well. So, it adds just a huge layer of complexity, the fact that Hamas has got hostages, and what does that do to Israel's strategy? Do they try and go easy to try and spare the hostages' lives, or do they just go ahead and assume that, look, the hostages will be, collateral damage, as brutal as that sounds, when Israel targets Hamas facilities, Hamas buildings in Gaza, because that's where obviously they're going to be held in some form. They're going to be where Hamas fighters are. So, I don't know how you begin to address that. It's just such a there's such a complexity there.
In terms of the international response, and concerns both ways, of course, an unequivocal support for Israel from US President Joe Biden. There's also comments that this attack wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for Iranian support, and concerns that if Iran got involved with this as well, then we'd be looking at a much more serious, wider situation. Do you think that is probable?
Yes, well, look, Hamas gets its resources from Iran. There's no secret about that. It's open. It's an open secret that they get, their weaponry from Iran, their money, resources to do what they do. What is not clear is whether Iranian officials were directly involved in the planning of this attack. And there have been conflicting reports. Wall Street Journal had a report earlier this week that was sourced to senior officials in Hamas and Hezbollah, which said that there was a meeting in Beirut last week in which Iranian officials and Hamas all agreed on the plan. But there have been US intelligence leaks overnight, just in the last few hours, which suggests that it's not true, and that Iran is very happy with these attacks on Israel, but they were genuinely surprised by them, and they were not involved in the planning. So I guess to the extent, does that actually matter? It depends, I guess, on your point of view and where you're coming from and what you want to achieve here. But it does show that you could end up with a much bigger war. If Israel goes after Iran, which is a possibility, by extension, if Iran becomes involved in the conflict directly rather than just through Hamas as a client, if Hamas is being under siege by Israeli forces, does Iran then go in there openly with its own forces to try and, support Hamas? I mean, you can come up with any number of nightmarish scenarios there because there are so many other players involved, including Iran, but don't forget Syria, don't forget Lebanon, don't forget all manner of other countries involved as well.
Certainly a complicated situation, and whilst New Zealand's response hasn't been strong at this point, we don't know who the foreign minister will be next week at this particular juncture, but certainly a situation to watch. We appreciate your wisdom and insight on this matter. Geoffrey, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Andrew.